Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Gittin daf Chav, Gittin 20. And we're going to start on 19b, 4 lines from the bottom. Ahu Gavra, there was a man, Tizarak la Gita with Vesahu, Bene Dani. There was a man, he just threw his get towards his wife, and the get landed amongst the jugs. But then they were looking for the get, they couldn't find the get. So they don't know if he really did throw a get. So ishtakach mezuzta, but they found the mezuzah there. So Amar Rav Nachman mezuzta the beini lo shlichi. So Rav Nachman said, listen, it's not common to find the mezuzah lying amongst the jugs. So it's clearly the case that he claimed he threw a get, but he really only threw a mezuzah. So therefore she's not divorced. Hani mili d'ishtakach Chada, that's where you find one mezuzah. Aval beis or gimel, but if you find 2 or 3 mezuzos, midahahave, anami from the fact that those 2 or 3 are there, that means that one is there, the other one was there. That means he didn't throw a mezuzah. The Gita, and where'd the get go? Amor achbaram shakua. The mice must have taken the get away, and so therefore we'd have to be concerned that she was indeed divorced. Be strict in that case. And so we would say she's divorced, but since we don't have the get, we probably make her do another get. There was once a man who went to the synagogue, Shakal Sefer Torah. He took a Torah scroll, Yahweh Debeso, and he gave this Torah scroll to his wife. And he says, "This is your get." So Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef says, why do we have to be concerned? Why do we think that that's a get? If you want to say, well, maybe he wrote a get on the outside in May Milim, and it's just that we don't recognize it. He did write a get for her. He wrote on the outside. It's just we don't recognize it. That's not our concern because Ein May Milin Agabe May Milin, because the Torah scroll itself is prepared on parchment that was prepared with this walnut juice, and we've already learned in our tractate that if you write with walnut juice on top of walnut juice, since the writing is going to be absorbed, it's not going to be a valid writing. And so therefore, if you're concerned, well, maybe he wrote it with this walnut juice on the outside of the Torah, well, that wouldn't be considered writing. So therefore, what's your concern if you gave her, says Rav Yosef, if you gave her the Torah scroll and said, this is your get, and on top of 20a, on top of Chaf Amud Aleph, but if you want to say, well, maybe the concern is because it says in every Sefer Torah, it says because of us Sefer Krisus, you have to give her a bill of divorce. So if that's your concern, we require when you do a Torah scroll, when you do a get, the get has to be written for her, for Lishma, specifically for this woman. And since the Torah scroll is not written for her, that's not a valid get. Maybe you say, well, maybe he gave the money to the sofer and he said, write for my wife this get within this Torah scroll. But that's not okay. Because Haba'ina and Shmo v'Shma v'Shem Ira v'Shem Ira, in order for it to be a valid get biblically, it needs to have his name and her name, and his city and her city, and it's not going to be. It certainly didn't have that in the Torah. So therefore, what's the case? So so it's so obvious that it's not a valid get. What's Rav Yosef even teaching us? Rav Yosef, my Kamash one. So what's Rav Yosef even teaching us? Well, he's teaching us this law. That if you have this walnut juice and it was written on top of other walnut juice, it's not considered writing because the juice is not, the ink is going to be completely absorbed and it's not a valid writing. Let's say the get was written without specific intent to write it for this woman, but then afterwards, afterwards, the scribe brought a quill and traced over the top of each letter Lishma. He did it for specifically for this woman. He wrote the get, and then afterwards he rewrote the get by tracing the quill over each person. So if that's the case, Banu lemachokes Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. Well, maybe this is, says Rav Chisda, the same dispute that we have between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan elsewhere in the Shas, where we have this dispute as relates to Shabbos and in general to writing the name of God in the Torah scroll. Before you write the name of God, if you want it, you have to be Mekadesh, the name of Hashem. You have to say L'Shem Kedushas Hashem. You have to say for the purpose of writing the holy name of God. And if you don't say that, it's not imbued with the holiness of the name of God when you in writing a Torah. So the Tanya, let's say you were supposed to write God's name there, but instead you intended to write Yehuda. That the scribe made a mistake, and he thought that this was a place where Yehuda's name was supposed to be written. But then he made a second mistake. And then he mistakenly didn't write a Dalet where he was supposed to, but instead he just didn't write the Dalet. So he wrote the letters of God's name, but he was intending to write Yehuda. So there, the Brisa says, Rabbi Yehuda says you could just take a quill and trace over those letters with ink and add another layer to it, and that'll be okay. That'll be as though you wrote God's name with intent. The Chachamim say that's not the way you write God's name, that you would have to start over, and you can't say that that's the writing of God's name. You can't just trace it, but rather you have to do it again. So this is not a writing that is ru'uya for Shem Hashem. And so therefore they have to rewrite it. So maybe that this is the dispute about a get as well. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could just, if the get was not real Shema, you could just rewrite but just drag the quill over the letters of the get. Where the Chachamim say no, that you can't do that. Gemara says, Amar V'Achmar Yaakov, no, Damalohi. Maybe it's totally separate. Adkan will come Rabban also. Maybe the Rabban over there say it's not good. Because when you write God's name, it needs to be done in the most beautiful manner. And this is not the most beautiful manner of writing God's name. But maybe by a get, it would be okay to write the get in this manner, because this idea of Hidur Mitzvah, of Zekeli Vambeu, of making it beautiful, doesn't apply to a get. And so therefore, maybe the Chachamim would even agree with Rabbi Yehuda in this case. You just bring the quill over and it'll be acceptable. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says something strange. He said, Yachilna, if I wanted to, he's like, if I wanted to, well, why would you want to? But he says, if I wanted to, I could disqualify every get Dalma in the world. Amar Lei Rabba. So Rabba says to Rav Chisda, my time, what's your reasoning? What's your thinking that you say you can disqualify every get in the world? Because of, if you want to say, because in general it says that the husband has to write it, and meaning to say when it says because of, that he writes it on his paper. But in this case, the way we do our get today, she's the one who writes it. What does that mean? She gives the payment to the sofer to write it. And this is based upon what the Gemara says in Baba Basra, because we have a takana of the agunot, because the husband is going to say, oh, I don't want to give the money, and so therefore he's going to delay the get. So the rabbis made a takana that she pays for the scribe. So if she's paying for the scribe, maybe he's not writing it because it's not his paper. And here she's paying for it. But the Gemara says, but maybe that's not a proof, because Dilma, when the same time the rabbis made takana, she pays for it. Maybe they rolled into that one takana that the rabbi said, well, she's actually first giving the money to the husband, and then the husband is giving it, because the court has the right to do this under the principle of hefker bezdin hefker. So why would you be able to disqualify every get? Maybe that's what's going on. So maybe the concern is that he has to give her the get, and giving implies you're giving her something of value, And here in this case, since the paper that it's written on is valueless, maybe he's giving her nothing. So therefore he's not giving her anything. So maybe she's not really divorced. But Rabbi says, but that's not a strong proof either. Dilma Nesinas Geti. So maybe the when it says v'nasan, maybe it's just referring to the get itself, and you don't need to actually give anything beyond that. Maybe that's all what's going on. Maybe it's Nesinas Geti. That maybe it's just teaching us the idea that that the husband just needs to give her the get itself. The shalchamitam, because they once sent a message from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, that if you were to get on something that you're not even allowed to derive benefit from, there's zero value to it, it's kosher. So for sure, if you write on this piece of paper, it's also kosher, because it doesn't mean he has to give her something of value. It means he has to give her the actual get. So the Gemara analyzes this statement. Gufa shalchamisam kasvu ali surayana kosher. We learned something similar in the Mishnah that needs no value, because it says that if you wrote it on an olive leaf, it's kosher. So we see from here it doesn't need to have value, the product that the get is written on. So the Gemara says, well, no. Maybe an olive leaf is totally different than something that's prohibited to have benefit from. Because an olive leaf, even though right now it's valueless, you can take 1,000 olive leaves and you can build something beautiful from it. So it's chazilas terufa, it can be joined with something else. So maybe it's different from something that you can't have benefit from. So you have to tell us that something you can't have benefit from your also is kosher, because the husband doesn't have to give her something of value, he just has to give her the get. Tanya Rebbe Omer Kasval is not kosher. So Rebbe taught this principle that if you wrote the get on something that's prohibited to have benefit from, it's kosher. Nafak Levi Darsha Mishmei de Rebbe. Levi went out and started teaching this in the name of Rebbe. The people weren't praising it. Nobody was accepting it, or not enough people. Mishmei de Ram. So then Levi went out and taught this teaching, not from Rebbe, but he said that the majority is teaching it, the Kosua, and they praised it. This proves he went to such degrees, he was so serious about it, proves that the law is like him, because he was so convinced that it was right. Tan Rabbanan, because of, it says he has the right to get below chakak, but it cannot be chakak. What's chakak? So this is a big halacha when it comes to stam, sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos, that the letters that you have to know, it says uchsavtem, you have to write the letters, but it can't be what's called chak tochos. Chak tochos is where you don't actually write the letter itself, but you write around the letter, you scratch out the ink around the letter, and as a result of that, the letter is formed. So let's say you have like you have a spill of ink, the ink spills onto the parchment, and you scratch out the letters, you scratch out the ink around the circle of ink that's made, and thereby you form a letter. That's called chak tochos, and that's not a kosher way of writing a letter. So back to our Gemara here, it says because of you have to write the get below chakak, but you can't do the chakak. You can't etch it out. This teaches us that this chakika is not considered writing. Is this really the case? Let's say the slave goes out. So let's say, because we say a slave that went to freedom with writing that was on a tabo or pinchas, these are different boards, yatzal cheres. Then he is considered to be free. Avolo, but not in the case but not in the case. But not in the case where that was embroidered onto like a hat or this ornament. So we see from here that the embroidering or onto the ornament is not considered writing, because it's considered chak tochos and it's no good. So Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Lo Kashal, there's different types of engravings. So there's different types of engravings. Hold on one second. The first brisa that says that a get is disqualified if it's chakukos, that's the chaktochos. That's where it was chaktochos, and the brisa that says that the eved that it was written on the tabla or the pinkas, that is where that is no good. Excuse me, that is good because that is chakirechos. Chaktochos is where you etched around it and that formed the letter, and chakirechos is where you actually engrave the letter by writing it directly and not by engraving around it. Gemara says v'tochos lo. If you're chak tochos, it's no good. V'aminu, don't we have a brayso that states describing the tzitz, golden forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol? It says that the ksav of it was not depressed, but it was boet. It was jutting out. It was coming out from the gold plate. Kedinari zahav, like a golden coin. By dinari zahav, but gold coins, they're tochosein. The way they're formed is by making an indentation in the gold around it, and then the gold coin, the image pops out. So the dinari zahav are boet. They jump. They're tochos. So the Gemara says, "Well, you're right. The tzitz was kedinari zav, v'lo kedinari zav. It was partially like the gold coin, but not completely like the gold coin. Kedinari zav, the boet. It was like the gold coin that it jumped out. V'lo kedinari zav, but it was not like the gold coin. The ulhasam tochos. There was by gold coin. It's tochos, meaning so you engrave around it. It jumps out. Hachi yerechos. But the tzitz is yerechos because it's great. Rashi explains, and the Gemara is going to say on the other side, it's engraved from the other side, and you push it through. So it wasn't tochos; it was yerechos. It's just coming from the other side. The coin, Rashi says, this is a sign of a coin that you call coins. So mechratz charetz or mechnufei chanef, meaning to say, or the way it's made, is it mechratz charetz? The way it's made, is it by pushing down the gold around it? So that's like chok tochos, or is it chenufei machnif, or is it made like where you push it out from one side to the other, like we described the tzitz? So I'm like mechratz charetz. No, a coin is made by basically what's chok tochos, by depressing around it, and then it comes out. So we see from here, so that's how coin is made. So if that's the case, so if you say that's how a coin is made by this chok tochos method, well then how can you say a tzitz is like this coin? If you say the coin is made by mechratz charetz, we're on top of Chafim Beis. It needs to be. We require. It says pituche chosam. You need the tzitz needed to be signed and written, and this is not written. So the Gemara says, "Kedinari zav v'lo kedinari zav." It's like the gold coin, but not exactly. Kedinari zav the boy. It's like the gold coin that it's three-dimensional. It's coming out to you. V'lo kedinari zav the hasam migavai v'achim miyakrai. By the gold coin, you make the image by depressing the area around it, and the tzitz, you make the image by pushing it forward from the other end. So on the top of 20b, 4 lines on the top, or 3 lines. So Rav asked Rav Nachman a question. Let's say he writes for her a get on a golden plate. And he says, it gives her this get. He says, accept this get, and at the same time, I owe you, let's say, $100,000. This gold plate is the equivalent of that. So take the get, and it's also the value of your ksuba. What's the law? So Rav Nachman says back to Rava, niskabel gita. She's received her get, niskabel ksuba. So she's also received her ksuba. He's given her the money he owes her for the ksuba. So the Gemara says, well, Eisvei, but we challenge us, niskabel gitech, shal ksuvasech, niskabel gita. If he says, take their get, and then the rest over that's beyond the get will be your ksuba, then we're going to say her get was received. Shal ksuba, and the remaining parts for ksuba. Time of the ikashard, what's the reason why that works? It's because there's a get, and then there's left over beyond the get, which is for the ksuba. Halei kashar. Whoa, but if it would not be the case, if there would be no leftover, we would say it's not a valid get. Meaning to say that Rashi says Rashi explains the Makam get, the place where the get is, he needs to give her as a matana gemura, as a complete gift because of divorce, and not as a payment of something else. And so we see there needs to be a remnant over in order for it to be able to be accepted as a ksuva. And the first part, when he gives her as a get, it needs to be completely a gift, and it can't be part of a payment for something else. So the Gemara says, no, even if there was nothing left over, it would be considered a valid get. And also, even if there was nothing left over, where we would say that it would be the same law. He can pay the ksuva from the get itself, even though there's nothing left over. But Al-Kamash one is teaching us the afagav the ikashar. He's teaching us that even if he gave her the get on the golden plate, and the get does not fill up the entire plate, nevertheless, the Amar law, if the husband said to her that the extra space is paying for the ksuba then it will be for the ksuba. But if he doesn't specify this, he will. But if he doesn't specify that the extra space on the get is paying for the ksuba, it would not be enough to pay it. We wouldn't be allowed to take it for the ksuba. My time, we would just say that the extra space is avir de megiltu. If the husband didn't specify that the extra space on the get is to pay for the ksuba, we would have assumed that it would have been absorbed within the get itself, and he couldn't claim that it's worth so much money, I'm also paying for ksuba. Tan Rabbanan, the Gemara is going to discuss other unusual ways of giving a get. He says, this is your get, but the paper on the get belongs to me. So that's not a valid divorce because you have to actually give it to her. But if he says, says this is your get, but on the condition that you have to return the paper to me after I give it to you, this is a valid divorce. Because as we're going to learn, Rashi points out, we're going to learn in Kedushin, Vavam Abayz, that a gift with the intent that you have to return the gift is still considered a valid gift. By Rav Papa asked the following question: Bein shito l'shito, bein teva l'teva mai. So he says, I'm giving you the get, but between each line belongs to me, or between each word belongs to me. What's the law? The Gemara says we leave that question unresolved. Teku. But teipukoi the sefer echad amar shnayim v'shlosha sfarim. But why can't we derive the answer? Torah says you give her one get. You have to give her one scroll, not two or three or four. A get has to be in one scroll, not two or three. So the Gemara says no. No, we're talking about a case where it was mu'ura, where the letters ran into each other. So even though there was multiple lines, that there was run over. So Rashi explained there were some very long letters that went from one line all to the next at the top of each word, and so it was connected. So there's this. So he has Rami Bar Chama has the following question. So there is this presumption that this slave, we'll just call him Ruvain, that this slave which we'll call him Ruvain, belonged to Shimon. The get kosav ayado, and there was a get that was written on Ruvain's hand. But now she walks into the Bezdin with Ruvain, and she says that this is my divorce. She walks into she brings Ruvain into the Bezdin, and she says, my husband gave me this slave, and he divorced me with him. What's the law? Do we believe her, even though there's no witnesses to say that this get was handed over? Because do we believe her because now this slave is in her possession, or maybe the slave just walked there on his own? Mi Amrina, do we say aknuye akni? Or do we say the husband handed the slave over to her and that's why she has it? Odilma uminavsheyayo, or maybe the slave went there on his own. So I'm a Rav of a tepukwe, but Rava says I can anyway prove to you that this is no good. Why don't we say that this get is no good because it could be easily forged, because maybe there were some conditions in the get, Rashi says, and maybe she erased them and then rewrote it. So the Gemara says, well, if Rava wants to say it's no good, Rava has a different problem then. Well, Rava Kashir Masnisin, our Mishnah seems to explicitly say that such a get is valid, that even though it could be erased, it's valid. Because our Mishnah says that if you write a get on the hand of a slave, it's valid. So it says al yad shel eved in our Mishnah that writing a get on the hand of a slave is valid. So the Mishnah says Bishlam mas nisin Rabbi can explain our Mishnah as Be'edim Misira Rabbi Lezer. He says our Mishnah, he said you could explain is that the get was handed over, the slave was handed over in front of witnesses. According to Rabbi Lezer, it says it's all required. Now Rami Bar Chama, according to Rami Bar Chama, who says we're talking about where she just walks in with the slave into the Bezdin, how do you know that it was written there? Maybe it was forged. Kasha. So the Gemara says Rami Bar Chama nami lo kasha. Rami Bar Chama could easily explain it. Biksuvas kaka. It couldn't be forged because it was tattooed on. So it was a permanent. So the Gemara says, well, hashas da'asas lahachi masnisin nami lo tikshe biksuvas kaka. So well, that's the case. What Rabbi does isn't pigeonholed into explaining. Our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Lazar, who says you only need witnesses to the hand over there too, is with a tattoo. So the Gemara says, "My havi Allah." What's the law in this case? If the woman walks into the court with a slave, which she says has a get on his hand, so the Gemara says, "Tashma damar shlakish hagodros einlan chazaka." We have a principle. If you have animals which wander around, then you walk into the court and you say, listen, this is my sheep. I'm the one wandering around with it. No, that's no presumptive status because the sheep or the goats, they wander around. You can't assume that just because in that person's possession that that person owns them. So too here also, you can't assume that this slave was given to her. There's no presumptive status. Hagodros eilan chazaka. So the Gemara then said, so therefore you wouldn't necessarily believe she was divorced. Let's say we know that she owns this board. The get kasav, we find the get on the board. And this board is being given by the husband to the wife. Is that going to be a valid get? Do we say that the woman gave the board to the husband, and so therefore he's able to give her the get? Or maybe the woman doesn't really know, since she's not really learned in the laws of business, she doesn't know how to really give it to him. She says, maybe she didn't give him a complete gift. And so therefore, since she requires something that he owns in order to divorce her, he divorced her with something that she owns, and so therefore it's not considered like he gave her something, like he gave her the get. It wouldn't be valid. So Amar Abaye says, let's try and answer this question. Tashma afu he'id. This is referring to a Gemara Mesechas Edus, which talks about different testimony that was given on that day where the Sanhedrin was opened up. So afu he'id, that it says about. It says about Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, or the Rashash writes that it means Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim. Hey, al Kfar Katan. So Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim testified about a small village, Shayabetzah Yerushalayim, which was on the side of Jerusalem. There was one elderly man, and he was lending out to the whole village. Vikosev Biksav Yado, and when he would write their IOU that they owed him, he would write it with his own handwriting. And other people would sign this contract. And we wanted to know if this was a valid contract. And the Chacham say, yeah, it's okay. Even though he wrote it and they signed it, it was still a valid debt note. So in order for a note to be valid, it has to be following the principle of Jeremiah in chapter 32, verse 11, where he says, I took a sefer mikneh. So we see from here that the person who's acquiring something or who's owning the debt has to write the contract on his own paper. And so we see from here, how did it work there? For sure, this old man gave it to the people, and that was considered a valid transaction. So too, with the case of the board, we'll say that the woman gave it to her husband, that's a valid transaction. So Rava says, no, he says to Abai, that's not a proof. My kushya. How is that a proof? Dilma Zakin Shani Diadoleknuye. Maybe the elderly man is different. He knows how to do business. He's got the lawyers. He went to law school. He knows he has to give it to each of them formally, but this woman doesn't necessarily know that. So it's not a strong proof. So the Gemara is going to leave this question for tomorrow's daf. The Gemara says we have to do this tomorrow's daf. All right, yes, if anybody has any questions, happy to address.